Hi. Thanks to the wonders of Mr. Edison's kinetoscope, we're here to comment on the events of the day in wondrous moving pictures. I'm Julian Sanchez.
I'm Ezra Klein.
And I guess we wanted to start off maybe by talking about some of the new developments as we approach the Iowa caucus, with just about a month left to go. We've got a couple of sort of surprising developments. The decline of Giuliani and Hillary and the rise of Mike Huckabee and Barack Obama. I suppose...
Not Giuliani, Romney in Iowa.
And Romney, right. Although I think, more generally, Giuliani's sort of been taking some hits of late.
We can only hope.
But so I guess let's start with Huckabee. I guess from my perspective, he's just sort of like a kind of Frankenstein. It's like if some evil mad scientist had cooked up in his lab a candidate with the specific intention of terrifying me personally, he would have patched together Mike Huckabee, who is, is kind of the worst of all worlds. Again, from my perspective, he's sort of a unrepentant social conservative with a kind of vaguely Californian sort of scold attitude on health, and none of that nasty skepticism about large government. And so, in a way, it seems like he maybe is a sort of test run of what Ross Douthat and Reihan Salam have called the Sam's Club Republican, which they think is...
He is a Sam's Club conservative. It's completely true.
This thing, actually, I think National Journal's Hotline observed that, or made that comparison about a year ago. And then more recently we saw Robert Novak and I think the Washington Post sort of denouncing him as a faux conservative, or as someone who has these views that should make real conservatives shudder, I think was his phrase. And certainly I'm not particularly happy about seeing the party shift in this direction, but those two, Ross and Reihan, do make a somewhat compelling argument that that's actually the direction that the party will move if they're interested in really sort of securing kind of... There's this sort of neglected majority constituency for a candidate who would combine, basically fairly leftish, or at least not conservative views on social spending, and at the same time, sort of, I guess, leavens it all with a hefty helping of Jesus talk.
Sure. I actually wrote, maybe about a year ago now, and my, how time flies, an article called Rise of the Republicrats, about what turned out to be Mike Huckabee, but based a little bit off of the Ross and Reihan argument. So to give listeners out there, you are listeners in Blogging Heads TV land, not readers, to give listeners a bit of background, Huckabee is currently leading in Iowa. He's beating Mitt Romney, who spent nearly $10 million, somewhere between $10 million, $7 million, something like that. He's leading Romney, and he spent $400,000. He spent nothing, and yet he's going right up the polls. And he's interesting because, as you say, he is a big government conservative and a Christian conservative. He's much purer in that way. He's not part of this sort of Republican tradition we've had over the past number of years, wherein you try and combine the business wing of the party with the the social conservative wing of the party. And I think this is exactly where the Republican Party is going, and here's why. It's sort of become very trite to talk about the Southernization of the Republican Party. But in fact, I think it's more important than people realize that as a party, you saw in the 2006 election, you had a ton of conversion of Republican to Democrat in Congress in the Northeast, in the West. The vast majority of the Republican Party seats now reside in the South. It's the base of support for their electoral hopes in the presidency, but also in Congress, also more generally. And they are a different type of conservative. The Pew Center for People in the Press, big polling firm, every couple of years it does something called the Pew Typology Study, where they try to snapshot the electorate into different groups. And used to be in 88 and in 94 that the Republican Party was made up of enterprisers, business conservatives, in other words, and social conservatives. In 99, they found a new group, what they called big government conservatives or populist conservatives. In 2005, they found them again. They were cemented as part of the Republican majority. This group is centered in the South. Very, very pro-regulation views, pro-government dealing with poverty, pro-environmental regulation, fears corporate power. They're still militaristic, hawkish on foreign policy, and they're very religious, very, very religious, and centered in the South. And they're now about a third of the GOP coalition. And these are the people who Huckabee is appealing to, if not through policy, then at least through rhetoric. The way you can tell, the real predictor for what separates this group from social cons and enterprisers is that 70% of them say at the end of every month they have trouble paying their bills. 88% of social cons and 88% of enterprisers say they don't. So this is a group of conservatives who are essentially economically insecure, and they want Social Security to remain. They need healthcare help. They want sort of government largesse and security and help adjusting to trade and globalization and all the rest. And that's what you hear Huckabee giving. I mean, he's also, don't get me wrong, he's getting a ton of support because he's a real Christian conservative in a party very, very dependent on that. But he goes around those stages and he says, when he talks about healthcare, he does a Giuliani thing. We don't want that socialized care in this country. It'd be too good. But he also goes in and he says, but we also don't want it being run by insurance companies and pharmaceuticals. He goes on those stages, he says, the Republican Party has become the party of Wall Street when it should be the party of Main Street. So he's bringing this sort of populism forth that the Republican Party hasn't had, but it's a much more natural fit for a large group of the coalition. And the question is, I don't think Huckabee will win the nomination because I don't think he's got the money for it. Right. But it's very hard to believe that having seen this break, others won't try to exploit the political ground Huckabee has sort of shown to exist here. And if that keeps happening, if people keep pushing that bar on the Republican side of the aisle, it'll be interesting to see if there's any way to salvage the sort of business conservative, lower taxes, no regulation, cut down on the entitlement state part of the party with the social conservative, Jesus wants to help the poor and help me part of the party.
Yeah, it strikes me that one of the things that is interesting about this election is that we are accustomed to, sort of as a convenient sort of analytic tool, talking about the Republican Party as a coalition of the sort of free market, small government, business-friendly, more libertarian, although it doesn't track perfectly, sort of voters, and then on the other hand, the hardline social conservatives. But some of the most central issues in this race are actually things that kind of approach orthogonal to that divide, that don't sort of cut cleanly on either side. Something like, so war, obviously. Foreign policy has always been something that sort of threw that into a bit of a jumble. I don't think.
But aside from Paul, Julian, that's not been true on the Republican side, is it?
Well, I think it is interesting to see if even if it's numerically perhaps not as significant as the attention that's been paid to him, the enthusiasm for Ron Paul shows that there at least a remnant of this sort of old right tendency, where the skepticism of government, extended to skepticism of this kind of foreign adventurism. There is something of that remaining, and I almost wonder about the extent to which the hawkishness isn't almost, in some cases, a kind of reflexive, disdain for the left. A lot of what sort of continues to glue the Republican Party together seems to be, precisely because it is composed of so many sort of diverse groups and ideologies. Is this kind of shared foes on the left. But also something like immigration.
The politics of resentment, as it's called in the blogosphere.
Right. You say ressentiment if we want to be pretentious
Ressentiment, right, if you want to be specific.
But it's just something like immigration, where on the one hand, sort of the libertarian or the free market wing tends to be more pro-immigration, but Ron Paul, sort of contra his type, I guess, or what you might expect, has actually taken a pretty anti-immigration stand. And these are all kind of things, I don't know, I guess sort of a series of hot-button issues that have been thrown in and that don't seem to cleave along the kind of comfortable divide in the party that we were talking about. It seems like one of Huckabee's liabilities, to judge by some of the reactions in the previous debates, is his sort of insufficient willingness to express animosity towards Mexicans.
Right. That'll be one. I think it's interesting, by the way, how much he has towed the line on things like the war, particularly. I think you're right to say there are a lot of issues that are cutting orthogonally, but at the same time, they're in different people. Huckabee is not a dovish guy.
Right, sure.
And Paul, while attracting a whole lot of enthusiasm, doesn't seem to be gaining, sort of relevant traction. It'd be very interesting to see, by the way, what happened if he decided to run a third-party candidacy, and I don't think he will. But as a general point, a lot of this is structural. Like, I'm tempted to say, haha, that Republican Party, right? Like, these are the tensions we always knew to be there, and now they're exploding. But I think that's almost to understate what's going on. I mean, not to be the Marxist determinist about it, but the reason an economic populist and a sort of a dove are shaking up the race is because I think the actual underlying forces of trends in the country, I mean, look at anything from poverty stats to health insurance to the housing crisis to we really do look like we're moving into recession to the utter catastrophe and failure of the war in Iraq. It's getting harder and harder, I think, to offer those positions up in their pure form. Not to say the Republican Party in many ways doesn't want to keep them in their pure form. I mean, even Huckabee, for whatever his rhetoric, there's a real where's the beef problem. This is a guy who will talk to you all day about populism, about caring for people after they're born as well as we do before they are, and he has, nothing but regressive, sort of down-the-line Republican policies. He's moving forward entirely on rhetoric, and in some ways he almost seems to be doing the reverse of a dog whistle. He's saying very loudly what he's for, but I think that I wonder if he's not trying, through his actual policy substance, to signal to the sort of traditional power centers in the party that, no, guys, I'm okay. Like, I realize what I got to do to get elected here. But as a general point, I think that what they're showing is not necessarily what's gone wrong in the Republican Party, although that's sort of a symptom of it, but what's going on in the country, how people are feeling about the issues. It's instructive, too, that at the same time, Democrats have moved very far to the left from where they were in 2004, much, much further. I mean, people forget that Howard Dean, his health care candidacy, did not have a universal health care plan. People forget that Howard Dean, his anti-Iraq candidacy, his plan for Iraq was the surge. As I remember, he wanted to send 44,000 more troops to Iraq. And now the party is about withdrawal, about universal health care, about sort of more populist economic stance. I mean, things have changed, and I'm really loath to say it's about the parties. I think it's about the actual issues.
I think that's right. Well, Dean was always sort of weird. I mean, in a way, I think it's not, this is an original comparison, but I mean, in some ways it has analogy in the case of Barack Obama. To some extent, I think, Dean was popular less for particular policy stances he took than because people were looking for something, and he sort of was there at the head of a wave that was sort of forming on its own. Also, incidentally,
should this be our segue into Barack Obama?
Incidentally, I think if you call Marxist historical materialism public choice analysis, it's still allowed.
Four. Wait, should we move into Obama then? Because I think that's a good segue.
Yeah, no. Let's talk about. All right.
So at the same time, I think that Huckabee has sort of been surprising people by moving up, and his rise has been a bit more shocking. Obama's pulled ahead of Hillary. Yep. Obama's pulled ahead of Hillary in Iowa, and Hillary's ahead of Edwards, so the entire order of that has changed. And he looks strong. I mean, I'm watching the Hillary campaign. I'm watching them closely. I like a lot of things they're doing, but I'm getting their press releases every day. I mean, 10 of them a day, and they're getting desperate. They have completely changed in tone and tenor. It used to be, I was really impressed with them throughout most of the primary because they went, in the exact same way that the Bush campaign settled on a narrative about Kerry very early on, and then everything from that point on, no matter what Kerry did, was flip-flopping. It wasn't that he was weak. It wasn't that he was a liar. It was that he was a flip-flopper.
Right.
And Hillary's campaign figured out inexperience. Obama's inexperience in everything, no matter what Obama did, no matter what he said, no matter how tenuous a connection was inexperience. They controlled their attack. And now it's anything. It's the health care mandate. It's Barack Obama said he didn't want to be president all his life, but in kindergarten he wrote a thing showing they wanted to be president in kindergarten. On and on and on down the line. They're just trying to find vulnerability. I mean, to the point that Obama, in what's almost like the most perfect meta Obama move ever, instead of attacking back, really, has put up a website called Hillary Attacks, where he just lists all of her attacks. I mean, it's the perfect new politics. But
I mean, in a weird way, he's moved very quickly to start acting like a frontrunner.
He has.
Given sort of the frankly,
he sort of always did. Is a weird thing about him.
Is what?
He sort of always did. Is a weird thing about him. he never really acted like, I mean, Edwards has acted like he was traditionally, in second place, like attacking on and on. Mm-hmm. Obama has sort of acted as if he had this very serene self-confidence, and eventually people would recognize that he is Barack Obama, this world-historic, uniquely charismatic, totally fantastic figure, and that they would all come to vote for him. And it turns out he was totally right.
But I think even more now, though. He seems to be trying this weird kind of jiu-jitsu thing where he's. Or it's like the old sort of Taoist idea of Wu Wei, like doing through not doing.
Sure.
He sort of.
That's a great.
I'm better because I'm not going to attack the candidate.
Right.
I'm just going to point out how much she's attacking, which you should not consider an actual attack.
I'm going to steal that, Julian, in anything I do from now on. That comparison. Obama, the Dow candidate, the Dow of Obama.
Yeah, well. It could be a bestseller, I think.
It worked for Winnie the Pooh. It can work for Obama.
I think it might actually sell better if you could tie it into Star Wars somehow, like Barack Obama, Jedi Master. That's not the candidate you're looking for. But no, it is really interesting to watch that unfold. How much do you think this is? I've seen it suggested that the dip in Iowa, which is sort of in some of Hillary's core areas of women union members, is sort of backlash from her support for Kyle Lieberman.
So Kyle Lieberman, for folks who don't know, is a piece of Iran legislation that Hillary voted for. Obama, Edwards is in the Senate, but he opposed it. Biden, Dodd both voted against. It was very weird. Originally, it was a very warlike resolution, very much so. The eventual iteration that she voted for was less so. It didn't really allow going to war. It declared the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is their sort of, I don't know, their special forces maybe, a terrorist group, which is a very weird thing to call an official member of another country's armed force a terrorist group. And in the legislation, it allowed for sanctions. But as a lot of people pointed out, if George W. Bush decided to attack Iran the next week, he was going to say that bipartisan support in the Senate showed that this was a terrorist organization within this country, and that in order to keep us safe, he had to do something. So her legislation, her work on that, seemed to many of us, myself included, unconscionable. But there didn't seem to be any political cost from it. I don't really think that this is about Kyle Lieberman. That's much too delayed of a reaction for me. I wouldn't see what that'd be. Maybe there's an ad, I don't know, but I looked at Obama's ads the other night. I didn't see one mainly focused on Kyle Lieberman. I think it's Edwards, actually. I think people haven't really seen this, but there's a dispute over whether or not this is a right analysis of 2004, but a lot of people say that Gephardt in 2004 killed Howard Dean, that he went after him so hard, so intensely, went so negative, that not only did he destroy his own campaign, because people in Iowa apparently don't like mean, but he destroyed Howard Dean's campaign, and Kerry slipped through. And that I think there's a real argument to be made that John Edwards has been going at Hillary so hard. And in Iowa, John Edwards is popular, gets tons of coverage in the press, has ads going up all over the air, that he's been going at her so hard that he's knocked down her, because he's knocked down her favorability and her setting the polls, because remember, the switch has only been a couple percent. And that Obama has sort of slipped through by just being, he gives a great speech, his organization is sort of off the ground there. I think that is probably what you're seeing here. And it actually concerns me, and here's why. I think Obama can learn the wrong lesson from the primaries. I think that a lot of people have argued that and actually I sort of hate that a lot of people. I've argued many others, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing that media thing some have said. I think Obama's not been sufficiently negative. I think he's not shown a willingness to attack. And he said, wait, let's see if the strategy works. And it has worked. But it's worked because John Edwards is there attacking Hillary every day. In the general election, that won't work. So if what Obama is looking at and has decided here is that he doesn't need to attack, he can be Barack Obama, and people come around to the fact that Barack Obama is a great guy, that is, I think, has been in some ways a correct way to play Iowa, but I really wonder if it's a correct way to enter the general. And I'm pretty sure it's what he and his campaign are going to be taking from Iowa, at least if some of the things he said in interviews has been correct. And that's partially just plays into who Obama thinks he is. I think that to Barack Obama, the idea of who he is not the idea of somebody who is going to run a harshly negative campaign.
Right.
I do not think if Barack Obama runs against Rudy Giuliani, every man, woman, child, and dog in America will know the names of Giuliani's first two wives. I think if Hillary Clinton does, they will.
Right.
That's a real difference, and I think it's probably the way to beat Rudy Giuliani.
Mm-hmm.
But I worry that Obama, who's been in a Democratic primary, I'm not saying it's not been a bit rough and tumble, but it's not been terribly personal, is looking at dynamics that won't exist and not seeing how important they've been to him. Because clearly the campaign is saying it's about Kyle Lieberman, it's about our attacks on the issues.
Right.
That seems very tenuous. Nobody can tell me why Kyle Lieberman suddenly became a big deal.
Right. But I wonder, do you think it's possible that he can sort of play a repeat of the same strategy where he sort of preserves, the image of the optimistic, kind of upbeat, positive, forward-looking candidate, and then allows surrogates to do the, sort of to go on the attack. Perhaps not because he has to sort of get into it himself. Although if he has to what extent does that sort of, sort of queer his narrative?
Right, that's the issue. Barack Obama's narrative, I never understood why they let the new politics be about Barack Obama not attacking Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. Like, why the first time Barack Obama came out of the door and attacked her, and they said, oh, where are your politics of hope now? He said, this isn't about not saying things that have gone wrong in the country. This is about saying what's gone right in the country, just kept on. But for a long time, he seemed really cowed by that. But I think you're right. Like, I think that if he really goes hard, that, he said so much about the sort of politics he wants to engage in, that people make him look like he's being inconsistent, that there's a narrative about who he is that doesn't fit with that.
Right.
And that worries me.
These could go either way. It may mean that he has more latitude to do that without being cold on it. In a sense, it seems like once the media has decided on a narrative, if it's really kind of gelled, it becomes incredibly difficult to unseat it to the extent that you can almost sort of do anything, and it'll be adapted somehow into the narrative.
Who are you hoping wins Iowa, Julian? Do you have a favorite on the Democratic side?
Is it possible? Can they all lose? Is that on the table? I'm
pretty sure it is for the Republican Party. It's clear that none of them can win.
Yeah, possibly at this point. Yeah, it may just sort of, it looks like they may all just sort of come out too wounded to have anyone really declare victory.
No, if you had to choose a Democrat, obviously not Kucinich or Gravel.
Yeah,
whatever. Kucinich, not Gravel. I'm just taking out Gravel. Who do you choose? Who's the libertarian choice for the Democratic nominees? It's still who?
Once upon a time, I was sort of sympathetic to Bill Richardson. I don't know how well grounded that is. I haven't. For sort of obvious reasons, I have not invested an enormous amount of time in really kind of digging into that intuition. He's probably not. I suppose it's not really. That's not really a choice that counts either. Of the front runners, honestly, I feel like anything if I say it now and they win in 2 years, I'll just be kicking myself. So I'm gonna take a pass.
So you're hoping for the comet to come down and obliterate the next Democratic debate.
We're talking about spinning events to fit a narrative no matter what. Perhaps that's not a bad segue into the National Intelligence Estimate.
Ooh, well done. Well done.
I tried.
Okay, NIE, people probably know about this, but it is a sort of summary judgment from the intelligence agencies, uses multiple streams of sort of covert information to sort of offer analyses or estimates of the probability of various sort of world happenings. In this case, the NIE was on the Iranian weapon programs, and it said Iran probably had a nuclear weapons program at one time. They shut it down in 2003. We do not believe it has been restarted. We do not believe they have the capability to make enough plutonium for a weapon, even if they did restart it, till past 2015. This is a problem for the Bush administration. To put it really lightly. And they have had, this is an important point, I think, they have had this NIE that's been classified for over a year. And it has been the year in which the Bush administration has done the most Iran warmongering, the most Iran fear-mongering, the most implying that they have a heavy weapons program the world possibly needs to do bombing to start. The question of how the NIE actually got released is a very interesting one. I don't know the answer. But, as sort of Matthew Iglesias and others have pointed out, if you go back and look, like, they've had these statements which, if you had never read the NIE, seem like they were saying Iran had this program and we needed to bomb them. Now that you've read the NIE, you can see how they were very carefully constructed to not quite run afoul of its conclusions. But this I'm trying to think of like an appropriately large metaphor. This is absolutely destructive to the attempts of people to push this country on a march to war with Iran. It will be you might
even say it's a smoking gun that comes in the form of a mushroom cloud, metaphorically speaking.
Or quite the opposite. It's a smoking gun that comes in the form of a non-mushroom cloud, or a gun that doesn't smoke.
Perhaps a shiitake mushroom.
Sure, something. It seems huge to me.
It's interesting to see that there seem to be basically two flavors of reactions to the NIE from sort of the hawkish side. They're kind of inconsistent, but on the one hand you have the sort of lies reaction, which we've seen from Norman Podhoretz, who kind of has to take this position.
Right.
I mean, he's had a post up at Commentary, I think, called Dark Suspicions about the NIE.
I like how he writes things as if he were like an evil Grand Vizier.
It is.
I mean, he just fits who Norman Podhoretz is so much. Like, you know, Dark Suspicions. I imagine him like delivering that blog post right after he spun around on his shadowy throne.
Right.
Like, I have some dark imaginings about what is going on.
We're not sure they haven't. We're not sure they have a nuclear weapons program. I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Right. Like, I assume he wrote that from within a cloak. But anyway, go on. By the way, just for listeners, Norman Podhoretz, crazy person, Grand Vizier, Dark Lord of the Sith. Also, Giuliani's one of his chief foreign policy advisors.
Yeah, key. The post. I mean, really, it's like people call Ron Paul a conspiracy theorist. Like this, the thesis of this post seems to be that the CIA, basically like hates America so much that they are engaged in a conspiracy to, I guess, fabricate evidence to conceal the existence of a nuclear weapons program, to discredit or otherwise embarrass this administration.
They hate America so much, they don't want us to go to war with a 70 million person country in the Middle East. Like, that's such a level of America hatred, one can hardly even conceive of it.
No, and as we all know, intelligence agencies, never benefit in any way when, threats from foreign powers are exaggerated. So,
right. Although, an interesting point, Kay Steiger, who, know, and is a friend of ours, made a cool point on her blog today. She said, the intelligence agencies, the Bush administration did so much to pin the failure of Iraq on them, on the faulty intelligence, that they probably really don't want to get the blame again. They probably really don't want to have that hit to their reputation and their profession's worth again. And that may account for some of their increased aggressiveness here, that the Bush administration overblamed them, and so they were really careful that if this happened, nobody could say when we found a weapons program, oh, well, the intelligence agencies didn't tell us that. That if I knew then what I know now, this wouldn't have happened, and it's really the CIA's fault. It's possible the Bush administration foiled its own plans by so aggressively passing on responsibility for their sort of poor performance in 2003.
It's true, although, I feel like they, if they're really just sort of looking to cover their ass, they could have delivered a much more hedging report that sort of...
No, but I think what Kay's saying isn't just cover the ass, but you will not. This will have nothing to do with us. We will have no part in it. Like, not even, not the sort of Alan Greenspan style. Well, if you look back at what I said, since you couldn't read it then, you probably can't read it now. But what I meant, but they're actually just saying, no, like, we will not be party to this. If you want to do it, you can take the country to war, like, we can't stop you, but you will not say it's because we told you this was a good idea, or didn't tell you it was a bad one.
It's also interesting to see that suddenly, so the Weekly Standard has this, again, up on their blog, sort of like very probing, like 5 questions about the National Intelligence Estimate, and it's like fantastic. It's like if the mainstream press had been this skeptical about the intelligence, in Iraq, 4 years ago, I would be delighted. but they are, after. I mean, it's very weird. Also, because the whole point of this is, we've known for years that we have terrible intelligence about Iran, and we didn't mention this when the 2005 NIE said that they were fairly confident that the nuclear weapons program was continuing.
Right.
Then I guess we had known this for years, but we should still, it was like a certainty. I mean, what did Dick Cheney call it in October? The undeniable fact or the inescapable reality of Iran's nuclear weapons program. At some level, I think this is healthy skepticism. I wish it had been perhaps more equitably distributed.
Honestly, I got to tell you, Julian, I don't take that as skepticism. Skepticism,
it's convenient.
Look, I thought Howie Kurtz made a fool of himself yesterday when he said in response, well, but the intelligence agencies have been wrong before. But, on some level, I don't really think Kurtz cares one way or the other. He's, being skeptical because, whatever, he's a journalist. I think he's just trying to, make a snarky point. But I don't think there is anything you could say to Bill Kristol, nothing, that would cause him to believe that Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program and we shouldn't invade them. So, that isn't skepticism. It's denialism.
Right.
And he just thinks that his best avenue right now is to they're wrong in 2005 and we thought that was perfect. And remember, by the way, the evidence for these reports is gathered in the years before. So the 2005 report, which would take a classification process to come out, meaning it was probably constructed sometime in 2004, which would mean the evidence was from 2003, 2002, on and on. So it probably made perfect sense. There was a lot more evidence of a nuclear weapon program years ago, back when they had one.
Well, and also, I know Joe Klein wrote something sort of hint, and normally preceding anything with Joe Klein said would cause me to suggest that, the precise opposite is very likely to be true. But suggested that various intelligence sources have told him that we have recently improved our intelligence in some way in Iran that makes these results more reliable. Interestingly, again, one of the Weekly Standard's many questions to raise about this report is, what are these sources? What has happened in our intelligence gathering capability that makes us more able to be confident about this than we were before? That's almost a question you ask sort of to ask it, because obviously the answer to that is it's classified and we can't actually tell you in any way. And previously, when the answer was it's classified, the correct response was, well, you see, if only you knew what we know,
right,
you would understand that this is necessary. So, kind of keep your head down and trust that they're doing the right thing. Now, I suppose, if it's classified, you're supposed to look very suspiciously and take several extra grains of salt.
And it's more than that, right? If intelligence had come out back in the day, right, and I had said, oh, well, what is our better intelligence now that, believes Iran is a nuclear weapon? Bill Kristol had said, what is wrong with you, you America-hating fool? Would you really like to get our operatives in the field killed? This is what he's asking for. It's been fascinating, though, not only to watch, the contortions of Kristol and Podhoretz and the crazy people, but also to watch the politicians, right? Bush gave a press conference today, and he came out and said, this is everything.
Oh, yes, I saw that.
He walked out and he said, this is great. It's everything I've been telling you. Iran,
this is
huge danger. They had a nuclear weapons program. The world needs to be on guard. They could restart it at any moment and pass from knowledge from the civilian program onto the weapons people, et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, he said what you would expect me to say, I guess. But more interesting, I thought, was Hillary Clinton. She sent out a press release yesterday, not her, though, Lee Feinstein, possibly, who is her national security director in the campaign. And it never said what the NIE found. It never said. There were two that came out. I didn't get one from Obama. I don't think he put out one. Edwards said the NIE's conclusions today showing that Iran hasn't had a weapons program since 2003 just show that the Russia war is, crap and a horse patooey, since we possibly will be on the New York Times. And that you can't trust this administration, that we need to think much harder before blah, 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 blah. Hillary's never said anything about what the NIE said. It just said, this just goes to show that, Iran's ambitions to get a nuclear weapon can be thwarted, that we can neither have an insane rush to war or unconditional meetings, which is to say you can either vote for Rudy Giuliani or Barack Obama. And then again, at the end, she said, and, Hillary Clinton's proposal of tough diplomacy with, like, a lot of saber rattling or whatever it may have been is the right mixture for this problem to keep them from getting a nuclear weapon. You could have read that and, like, thought that what the NIE said was that Iran has a awesome nuclear weapons program, but, like, they aren't crazy people and can possibly be deterred. So, I actually thought that was a terrifically disappointing thing from the Clinton campaign. But it really just showed, them in the Bush campaign that the degree to which this is going to get... the degree to which the media is pushing this into the reality, into the sort of political slipstream, if the politicians just had this, the degree to which they would just interpret it however they want is terrifying. Totally terrifying.
Well, and this is the other sort of inconsistent narrative, which is, you see, this proves how brilliant sort of the Bush foreign policy has been all along. And at some level, Norman Podhoretz can't take this view because he sort of staked his reputation on the view that the people in charge of Iran are, almost literally insane. Right. Theocratic lunatics. And so conventional deterrent logic is completely inapplicable to them. At some level, sort of more in sorrow than in anger, we probably just need to exterminate them. So the other side, or the other view, it seems like this is kind of the view the White House has taken. This is sort of that, Stephen Hadley seems to be kind of pushing this line. Victor Davis Hanson and Glenn Reynolds both seem to be kind of pushing this idea, which is that, you see, this just proves that Bush has been right all along and his policies are effective. This is incredibly convenient. It's like we're going to throw the witch in the lake. And if she floats, that's unnatural, and she's a witch. And if she drowns, God wanted her to die, so she must have been a witch. So, no matter what is going on in Iran, it validates what George Bush was doing. Except that there doesn't actually seem to be any reason to think that the discontinuation of the nuclear program was a response to, sort of a fear of imminent attack.
I think it's much worse than that, actually. I will perfectly, I don't think you need to give them this, but whatever. If they want credit because sanctions worked, putting international pressure on worked, trying to back up the EU's negotiations worked, fine. I'll give it to them. What the NIE also shows, which is, I think, pretty important, is the timing of this is very interesting, right? They shut it down in 2003. Something else happened in 2003, which was that Iran came to America. They sent very, very clear, unmistakable signals through, if I remember correctly, the Swedish ambassador. And this can all be found in the writings of a guy named Gareth Porter, who's written it in The American Prospect, whose conference room I'm currently in and who should subscribe to. But Iran came and said, let's make a deal. We will give up the nuclear weapons program. We will allow full, free, untrammeled inspections. We will do whatever you want. We want security guarantees, various economic incentives, etc. And the Bush administration, then riding high, said no. You're part of the axis of evil. Essentially, we're not going to do this deal with you. They just rebuffed them completely. We had an opportunity, which we knew before this to have been a real opportunity, but now we know to have been a truly, truly significant opportunity to end it all. There would be no Iran threat. In fact, not only would there be no Iran threat, but we could have moved towards something like a normalization of relations. They could be much more helpful in Iraq, by the way, where they have a whole lot more influence than we do. They could be helpful in the war on terrorism. So much good could have come out of cooperation between our nations. And they said no. So it isn't just that. They are overplaying the brilliance of their own strategy, that they've been warmongering, and really all they need was diplomatic pressure, but that they had an opportunity to find a really substantial solution to this situation, and they refused it. They didn't just miss the opportunity. They said, no, we don't want to take it. And a lot of bad has been done by that. Sanctions are an economic loss all around. They're bad for the Iranian people. They make them hate us. They're, the likelihood of something possibly creating war between our nations, particularly while we're in Iraq, while the Bush administration has been trying to trip up the Iranians, kidnapping their people and arresting them and all the rest, very, very high. that is where sort of Reynolds and all them are just staggeringly dishonest. That they let all that dissipate into the wind, and there's no reason for it. Bush is not going to be reelected. He cannot run again. The insane need to continue defending this man's grievously bad policies, which just about security experts from all over the map, as Foreign Policy has recently done a poll, say have been bad security policies that made us less safe. The insane need to continue defending them as if they've shown perfect foresight and vision in every particular is bizarre to me. And this just shows it again. This is not what the Bush administration has been telling us. It is not what they've been saying we need to do. And it turns out that, in fact, Iran has been much less of a threat, much more deterrable, and much more willing to take sort of American inducement and incentive into account. And we have sat there and said, no, we won't meet with you, we won't talk with you, we won't deal with you, we will let this get worse, which is what apparently Bush thought was happening. And then when it turns out it didn't get worse, oh, what a triumph for our strategy. Whoopee for us.
Yeah, I mean, well, but I think in part it's that this is something sort of Christopher Hitchens wrote about a little bit after 9/11. I mean, I think for a lot of people, a lot of people who probably 8 years ago were not especially sort of fire-breathing Republicans, if they were Republicans at all. There's I think there's a way in which this sort of conflict, sort of the war on terror era, has created this sort of frisson, right? This sense of a master narrative that that they sort of lack in a kind of an era where the conflicts are about. Ezra?
Mm-hmm. Are you hearing that?
Yeah.
On my phone. Sorry, I think that'll stop now. My phone just had a little...
Okay.
We had a technical malfunction here at Blogging Heads HQ.
Okay, sorry, yeah, I was sort of perplexed. I wasn't sure where that was coming from.
I tried to change the volume on my phone and accidentally tried to call my voicemail.
Okay.
So.
Well, anyway, yeah, I mean, I think there's a sense in which this kind of this narrative of sort of culture clash conflict, jihad versus McWorld or whatever, in a way, is this kind of grand orchestrating concept that sort of infuses their lives with this kind of, almost transcendent meaning, in a way that's lost if it ends in sort of diplomacy instead of victory. And so I think there's a sort of aversion to, sort of having that sort of stolen. I mean, it's like at the end of the Matrix, right? Everyone was sort of waiting for the grand victory over the machines, and then they find this détente, and in a way, if you're kind of used to the conventions of the action movie, you're kind of going, I mean, I thought it was sort of a brilliant move, but it can be disconcerting if you're kind of invested in that kind of narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
I think it's true. They're totally invested in it, and I'd say that there's one other part to the NIE which I think people should take seriously, that they said if Iran does try to do nuclear development, they will not do it in their nuclear program. They will do it covertly. They will do it underground in deep bunkers that we don't know about. If you want to stop that program through force, you cannot just bomb. You will need to either flatten the country completely or invade and change the regime. There's no middle ground here. This sort of comforting fairy tale we'll send up a couple of F-22s and it'll be sweet. It'll be just like Kosovo.
Right.
Again, that will not be the case. We'll be embroiled in a massive war in which hundreds of thousands, at that point, I guess tens of thousands of our troops are right next door in Iraq, completely vulnerable to Iranian forces as well. Not only do they not have the program, but the hypothetical program they could have, not easy to stop. Cannot be done through force. It would be just a terrible move. But
I mean, in part, and this is certainly, it's not a comfortable thing to say. Certainly not for me, because I am not at all sanguine about the prospect of a nuclear Iran. But I find myself often wondering how much longer we can really, sort of delay the spread of a technology that's essentially 60 years old now.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree. If we can delay it for 10 years, until maybe this regime is out, or a more friendly one is in power, whatever we can do to make that happen. But I mean, they're talking about things. When Bush gives speeches about the threat, he talks a lot about the knowledge and the expertise that they're determined to acquire.
Right.
And I find myself thinking, well, it's what is the time horizon over which you can expect to prevent people from learning physics, even in countries you don't like?